Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the 2021 Leadership Alliance Virtual Professional Development Series, Week 7. And this week, the workshop will be focusing on finance. Today's workshop is one of two finance workshops, and we will be presenting this week to answer questions and share perspectives on financial wellness during your graduate studies. Understanding finances as a graduate student, and especially as a prospective graduate student, can feel incredibly overwhelming. We hope that today's workshop will offer some good advice and resources as you work to understand finances and opportunities along with the research pathway. We are happy you have joined us, and we look forward to answering all of your questions. To start off, I'm Amanda, and I'm a third-year PhD candidate in the Department of Molecular Microbiology and Immunology here at Brown University. I study schistosomiasis, which is a neglected tropical disease, and my work focuses on identifying vaccine candidates for this disease. I'm also the outgoing president of SOCNUS, which stands for the Society for the Advancement of Chicanos, Hispanics, and Native Americans in Science. And last but not least, I'm a study group leader for Leadership Alliance SR-EIP this year. So for today's panel, the panel was curated by Dr. Emily Roberts. Dr. Emily Roberts is a personal finance educator specializing in early career PhDs. Through her business, Personal Finance for PhDs, she equips graduate students, postdocs, and PhDs with real jobs to make the most of their money. She gives seminars at universities and for associations, interviews graduate students and PhDs on her podcast, and serves as a money coach and creates courses and workshops on taxes, investing, and much more. Emily holds a PhD in biomedical engineering from Duke University and lives in Southern California with her husband and 2 children. She has invited 3 panelists here today who have appeared as guests on her podcast to join her on this panel. The Leadership Alliance is grateful to all of them for their participation and insight. We have robust representation from Leadership Alliance partners who will be sharing their experience and wisdom during this workshop. It is my honor and pleasure to share space with them this afternoon. First, I'll be introducing Letitia Franklin. Born and raised in Mobile, Alabama, Letitia Franklin received her BS in biology, minoring in chemistry from Dillard University, which is a historically Black college and university. She is a 6th-year PhD candidate in biochemistry, microbiology, and molecular biology at Pennsylvania State University. During her graduate studies, she has presented her work on metabolism and muscle dysfunction associated with metabolic disorders at conferences such as the International C. elegans meeting and the Penn State Life Sciences Symposium. Letitia shows her passion for service through hosting lab tours for elementary students, leading diversity, equity, and inclusion workshops, and mentoring undergraduates and graduate students. She purchased a brand new compact SUV in December 2015, paid it off in May 2017, and she did not have a cosigner for either purchase. And while making less than $2,000 per month as a grad student, Letitia enjoys relaxing in her tent, as well as reading and recording videos for her YouTube channel called Gratified Grad, where it's her goal to help you graduate with gratification. Next, I'll be introducing Dr. Zach Taylor. Dr. Zach Taylor is an institutional support consultant at Trellis Company, where he works to support minority-serving institutions in the U.S. South. He has worked in education for almost 15 years, with many of those years advocating for people with disabilities and their rights to secondary and post-secondary education. He has published over 100 articles, chapters, and conference proceedings in peer-reviewed journals and has made over 250 presentations related to higher education communications and digital accessibility for people with disabilities. Next is George Walters Mara. George Walters Mara is originally from Miami, Florida, and received a BS in molecular biology from the University of Central Florida, and is currently pursuing a PhD in biophysics at Stanford University. During his undergraduate career, he participated in multiple research programs, including the Leadership Alliance Summer Research Early Identification Program and the McNair's Scholars Program. As a graduate student, he has received multiple fellowships and is currently conducting research focused on how intracellular pathogens survive with their host from a metabolic viewpoint. He has recently gotten involved in a student-run nonprofit that supports trainees that are interested in launching their research projects into startup biotech companies. He is also interested in personal finance and investing and has created a document with resources to learn about personal finance as a grad student. He is passionate about being involved in outreach, recruitment, and retention efforts of students from underrepresented communities and is always willing to chat about research and funding opportunities. A huge thank you to all of our panelists today for being here. The Leadership Alliance appreciates your time, and with a full roster of student questions, I know our students are looking forward to hearing from you. So let's get started with their questions. Thank you, everyone. So let's start off with a question that really puts into perspective how finance works as a grad student. So can someone please explain what a stipend is and how a PhD is funded, and also explain the relation of a grad student to the university in the context of finances?
I can take a pass at that one. Big question. So as a PhD student, your financial relationship with your university is extremely different from when you are in undergrad, most likely. So these are, I'm speaking in kind of broad generalizations here, but as an undergrad, you are paying money to the university for tuition and all that sort of thing. That's your relationship there. Maybe those are through loans or whatever. At the PhD level, if you are what's known as fully funded, which certainly not everyone is fully funded, but this is how it works if you're fully funded, you are still being charged tuition and fees and so forth, but that is generally being paid in full or almost in full on your behalf by your funding source, by your department or by an outside fellowship. I'll get more to that in a moment. So your tuition and fees are generally being paid for you, usually in their entirety or close to it. You, in addition, receive what's known as a stipend. Most people call it a stipend. Some people still might call it a salary. So it's usually money that's intended to go towards your living expenses. And it's typically paid out on a monthly basis or bi-monthly or bi-weekly, sometimes once per term. And that is what you're essentially to live on. It's kind of like a salary. So there's two broad types of stipends that you may receive, sources of this funding. The first type is from being a part-time employee of your university. And most universities call that having an assistantship. So that could be a teaching assistantship, a research assistantship, or what's sometimes called a graduate assistantship. It's more like an administrative position. So you could be a part-time employee, usually up to 20 hours per week is typical, part-time employee of the university, and you're receiving these benefits of your tuition and fees being paid and also having a stipend, but you are a part-time employee. The other general category of how funding, the type of funding you may receive, is known as fellowship funding, another general term. Some places might call it something slightly different. But this is when you're not technically an employee of the university, but you are being awarded money, the money that goes towards paying for your tuition fees and also paying your stipend. And you're just being given that because of your merits, usually as a wonderful incoming PhD student and researcher. It could be from a specific training grant. It could be from a specific fellowship. It could be internal to the university, external to the university, but those are the two broad categories. And it's very typical for PhD students to have a combination of funding at different years being funded, from one source or the other and switching back and forth. It's very common. So I'll say for myself, when I was in graduate school, I had a couple of years funded from internal fellowships that were sort of sponsored by my department, and several years being funded as a research assistant on my advisor's grants. So that was my model. And I'd love to hear the other panelists say how their funding worked during grad school.
So I could go next. So I guess I'm a rising second year PhD student. And with respect to my school, all students in the biosciences at least are fully funded for like the duration of the PhD. In my case, I have 3 fellowships. So I have 2 internal and 1 external. And that money runs out my 5th year. But then if I kind of do a PhD, my PhD takes longer than 5 years. either my faculty mentor will pay for it or the school will. They'll find a ways to fund it. But yeah, I'm not paying anything out of pocket. Like my stipend covers my housing, my food, like everything. It's like they basically, I live on Stanford campus. So they take the money out from my housing and then all the rest of the money comes to me and I kind of budget that out for the quarter. So that's kind of how my financial situation is.
And Letitia, was it the same for you? Are you on multiple funding sources, or was your housing taken directly from your stipend? And if not, how did you sort of figure that out?
So mine is a little bit different. Actually, it's a lot different. I had, when I was teaching, I was a TA or on a teaching assistant. And then now I'm no longer teaching. So I'm a graduate assistant, and where I'm doing research, and the research that I do contributes to my stipend. I also have a scholarship, and then I also get internal funding from the college itself.
Great, thanks. So now that we sort of have that as background information, a common question that we received is, what are some things that you should be thinking of as an undergraduate student to afford graduate school? And maybe that's in the context of applications, or maybe understanding that there is going to be housing that you have to pay for. So what are some steps that undergraduate students that would like to pursue grad school and a PhD, what are some steps that they should take early on to not have to incur extra debt?
Sure, I can talk about that one a little bit, I guess. So first and foremost, I think understanding your level of comfort in living and the kind of luxury or amenities that you think are necessary for your life. For instance, almost every single graduate student I know has roommates. So it's not, maybe not in the residence halls like maybe a lot of y'all are in, but are you willing to have roommates? Are you willing to commute? How far from home are you willing to apply? A lot of graduate programs want to diversify geographically. So if you're in New York City, you may be a lot more competitive on the West Coast applying. Are you willing to make that sacrifice of moving a great distance to be more competitive and to be more competitive for a funding package? I also think, are you willing to wait? Because in my situation, I applied to PhD programs for 4 years and did not get a full ride. I was not fully funded until my 4th year of applying. So that was something that I was willing to just negotiate with myself and say, I don't want to take out any loans for this. I want to be compensated for the labor that I'll provide to the university. And I just waited, and it took a while, but it eventually happened. So I think just getting your kind of level of living and what sacrifices you're willing to make, and then are you willing to move, and are you willing to wait a while and live with roommates?
I could talk about this as well. So as an undergrad, this is a lot like what I did. Just find opportunities to write, whether that's like a grant, personal statement, applying to programs, because most of the funding that I got is because I was like writing personal statements for fellowships or grad schools and stuff like that. And when you're applying to grad school, apply early, because if you apply late, you might still get accepted, but you might miss out on the internal grant. So I got an internal grant from my school because I applied early, and they kind of just gave it to me because I applied early. I mean, my application as well played a part. But yeah, and then another thing that I did, like my last year, right before I kind of continued on to a PhD, I took a personal finance class. Just because that's kind of like how I got introduced to personal finance, and I really liked it. And it was nice that I could like take a semi break from like taking hard classes my last semester and kind of focus on different things, which was personal finance. So it's kind of like a win-win.
I'll underscore.
I just wanted to give like a very specific expense that I wasn't aware of in moving, and that was just moving in itself. So I came from Alabama to Pennsylvania for grad school, and I think it took maybe like the first month and a half before I actually got paid. but I still had bills due in that first month of me being there. So I had to prepare and have money to live that first month before I actually got my first, I guess my first stipend. So I'm paid monthly. So before I got my first monthly stipend, I needed funds to just get here and live.
Thank you. I think that gives a lot of context for what to do those months that you have an opportunity to work or do something so that you have funding available for you for yourself that first month, because usually students get paid at the end of the month. So if you're moving in August, early September, you're not going to be paid until the last week of the first month that you're going to be there. So I think it's good to like hear these perspectives on how students budgeted for that prior to arriving on campus. Emily, did you want to add something?
Oh, my bad, go ahead. I was just gonna quickly say, I put something in the chat. So when I was moving over here, like before I accepted to come, I actually asked, like, so I had some leverage. Are there any transitioning costs, or do you like provide any of that? I just asked and they gave me some. So don't be afraid to ask for money.
I totally agree with what everyone has said so far. I won't repeat any of it, but just to add, it would be a great idea for you to come into graduate school if you're going to be living on that stipend without any other debt, like credit card debt, for example, car loan, if you can pay that off. Student loans are okay because they can be deferred, but any payments that you have during graduate school, it's going to be tough on a stipend. So if you have at all the opportunity, even if it means you work for a year or two, like Zach was saying, pay off whatever debt you can aside from student loans or a mortgage or whatever before entering graduate school.
Thank you. So if no one else wants to add about maybe that transitioning period into the PhD, we can move on to another question. So we've thrown around the word fully funded a lot, and I think maybe some students are not aware of what that means. And in the chat, we see that some students are asking, there are some programs that are fully funded, there are some that are not. So can someone explain what that means to be in a fully funded program, to be yourself fully funded? And someone else asked if that means if they're in a fully funded program, if they have to apply to fellowships. So can someone ask, part of that question or both parts?
Yeah, I'm happy to speak. I'm happy to speak on that quickly. So fully funded, at least in my understanding of it, is your tuition paid? Do you have a stipend, and do you have benefits? Because as at least, some universities can go down to 10 hours a week, but as Emily was saying earlier, if you are a 20-hour-a-week employee or more and you are designated as a student employee, you should get healthcare benefits, dental, vision. Most universities offer a comparable insurance package to what faculty and staff get. At least I came from UT Austin and the insurance was almost the exact same. So I would say fully funded, meaning your tuition and your stipend that you can use to buy personal things and rent and food, that kind of stuff. And then also insurances. And just in my exploration looking at higher education PhD programs, almost every R1 university could provide a select number of students full funding for 9 months. And here's another one of the tricky parts about graduate school is that you are a little bit at the mercy of the academic schedule, which is typically August to May. So you're going to get in there, you might get paid September, it might be your first paycheck. Your last paycheck might be in May. And then you may need to hustle for a fellowship or a scholarship or a teaching assistantship over the summer to cover, and I'm talking mainly social sciences. I'm not exactly sure how STEM works, but so many social sciences, you got to kind of cover your summer months because you may not be insured, you may not have money coming in. If you want to take a summer class, that may not be part of your fully funded package. So also just read the fine print on your funding package. A lot of universities may be very, very short and they'll give you a one letter. Ask for more detail. Say what exactly is being funded, how much after taxes will my stipend be. They can give you the information. They want you to come. If you're recruited and they offer you a full package, they want you to come, but ask for more detail so you know exactly how you can budget your money and when you know you got to start hustling or not.
Okay.
To add on to that, Zach, to add on to what Zach said. So in STEM fields, I do think it's much more common to have 12-month funding. It could be from different sources, but to have your advisor, your department say confidently that you will be funded for 12 months, for maybe 5 years, like George was saying, or maybe longer. So that is more typical, but it's still something you absolutely have to ask about, like Zach was just saying. Another nuance about this term fully funded is that it's kind of referring to like what Zach was just saying about your tuition being paid, your fees being paid, your health insurance being paid for. What it's not saying is whether or not the stipend that you're receiving is actually sufficient for paying for typical living expenses for a graduate student in that city. It does mean that there will be a stipend. Full funding means there's a stipend offered, but is it actually enough to live on? That's something you're going to have to investigate further.
I could talk a little bit about the fellowship. So if you're fully funded, you don't have to apply to the fellowship, but I think that you should because it comes with benefits. Some people say that if you have a fellowship, it frees you up a little bit to kind of work with who you want to work with so that funding isn't an issue. And not only that, like if you like a lot of fellowships you can apply to before you actually apply to grad school. And then a lot of grad schools actually ask, did you apply to this? Did you apply to fellowships and stuff like that? And that can actually strengthen your application because they're seeing that you're actively looking for funding. So there's like multiple benefits that come from fellowships. And another benefit is that some schools actually top up your stipend. Like I think I get an extra 3,000 a year because I got a fellowship coming in. So that's another benefit of applying to fellowships.
Okay, so now that we talked about what fully funded means, if you require fellowship, it seems like it's usually that if you are fully funded, it's just strongly encouraged that you get a fellowship because, as George said, it increases your chances of then being successful in attaining more funding in future years because it looks like, you know, it's a feather in your cap. It looks really good. It's an accomplishment, it's a merit, and that it also gives you extra benefits, right? You now have maybe an extra 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 per year. So now that we talked about that, a few of you asked, how do you budget your stipend? And how do you budget that income in the context of housing, in the context of your books or any electronics that are needed for your, you know, years throughout your graduate school? So does anyone want to take on that question?
I can talk just a little bit about what I did before I chose the grad program I chose. So I applied all over the country, and essentially I landed on UT Austin because it was the best financial deal. What I started doing then, as soon as I had applied this, I submitted my application in the fall, I think it was end of October. As soon as I applied to UT Austin and said, you know, this could be a possibility, I started a spreadsheet with all my schools that I applied to, and I started looking up median and average rent in the city in the 4 surrounding zip codes of the university. I called Austin Energy, which is the energy or the electricity company, and asked for average cost of electricity per square foot. And that will give you a good idea of if you go to an 800 square foot apartment and split with somebody, your electric bill in the summer might be $60. You can do the exact same thing with utilities, call the utilities companies. That little phone call, they can give you a little estimate. And I knew almost to about $100 range exactly what I paid when I first moved into Austin. And Austin, just quickly to the apartment that I moved in on was $980 a month. And if I had broken my lease 2 years later, that same apartment would rent for $13.90 a month. So it went up by about $400 in just a few years. So two, when you're budgeting, if you're in a city that you know is the cost of living is going to increase, especially some really growing metro areas, you've gotta save some extra money, or you gotta budget for change and budget for cost of living increases. Because I particularly stayed in my apartment, even though it wasn't the best fit, because I couldn't afford to move out because any place else I would have been priced out. So I would say do a ton of research on the city, get rent and utilities, and then you'll have a better idea of when you move in of what you can afford, then plan for cost of living increases.
I could talk about how I budget. So I get paid once a quarter, so that's like once every 3 months, but my budget is monthly. So the way that I kind of, and the reason it's monthly because I use an app called Mint that tracks all my finances and kind of I have my budget in there, and that's why it's monthly. But to get around that, when they give me my money at the beginning of the 3 months, I put all of it into a high yield savings account, and then at the end of the month, I take out the amount that I need and put it into my checkings accounts, and that's exactly what I need for the month, so that I could still budget for a month and not kind of have like this huge lump of money that I probably will blow on something. So that's kind of like how I budget. And like my kind of method to budgeting is I don't really budget to, I mean, I budget to like save money, but I try to be comfortable with my budget. So I try to make my budget so that when I look at my budget, I don't feel depressed. So it's more so that I'm budgeting so that I don't waste my money, but I also have enough money to do things that I like. For example, like in the Bay Area, haircuts are really expensive. They're like $50, but I still put that in my budget, even though it's ridiculous because I like getting haircuts. So that's how I go with respect to budgeting. Just kind of budget, like look at how much money you have and make sure that you can do the thing that you want.
So for me, coming into graduate school, I had no sense of money. I didn't really hear my parents talking about budgeting and things like that. So my approach initially was just don't spend the money. It paid off later on because I ended up saving a lot of money my first 2 years in graduate school. But essentially, I moved into an apartment by myself. So I didn't want a roommate. And so like I did spend double the amount to have a place by myself. I made sure that all of my bills were paid first. So like the electric bill, I would estimate off of the first 2 months, I would do an average cost, and then that would be how I would figure out how much I would essentially pay monthly. And I would always set aside that amount. So for my first 2 years, I would spend about $120 on bills. And so that would be like water, electricity, and like washing clothes. And so regardless if I spent that entire $120 or not, I would set that money aside. And so essentially, like, let's say my bills came out to be $80 during the summer month. Well, that means that that extra $30 is still there. And so every month it just starts accumulating. I'm sorry, the extra $40, but it just starts accumulating. And when it comes down to maybe during the winter months where my electricity bill goes up and it hits maybe 160, I have a cushion from where I was saving money in those summer months. So that was like the best thing that I could have done, I feel like, because I never went over my budget at any point because I always had a cushion available.
And for my budgeting experience in grad school, I would say I budgeted very intensely. I also used Mint like George does. I had some pretty ambitious savings goals when I was in grad school and investing goals, and we can talk more about that later. I know there were some submitted questions, but that meant that I had to be pretty careful about my spending side of things. But like George, I still wanted to have some luxuries in my life and do the things I wanted to do. I just had to be really, really, really intentional about it. And an issue that I had with my budget in grad school that I find is really, really common among grad students is dealing with irregular expenses. So those are fairly large expenses that occur like maybe once a year or a few times a year. So for me, that was like I paid for a parking permit on campus once per year. So that was a big expense at that time. So I went to Duke, so I paid for like Duke men's basketball home game season tickets. So that was not bad for a student, but it was an expense. Travel, buying flights, that sort of thing. All of those are irregular expenses. And so I started using a particular budgeting method called targeted savings or sinking funds, which is basically a method of saving up in advance for certain categories of expenses. And then when those expenses hit, you can pull the money from that specific savings account to cover it. And that took a lot of stress out of my budget once I started using that system.
Thanks, everyone. So I know that there are a few questions about fellowships coming in, but we're gonna put those to the side for now. I want to take 2 steps back from what we just talked about. So what were the major factors in the context of finances that played into your decisions to going to the grad schools that you ended up picking? So was the cost of living of the city an important factor? Maybe the cost of traveling back home, was that an important factor? So what are some things that played into your decision making when you picked your schools?
The one big deciding factor between going to California or Texas was the state income tax laws. And Texas does not have state income tax. So I know that the dollar amount was fairly similar, but just the tax structure of Texas was way cheaper. Also, I found that utilities were like, about a third of the price in some of the other areas that I was looking at. So utilities were way cheaper. And then you got to look at the state. I know for grad programs, especially for students who really want to watch their money, Texas and Florida are really attractive states because they don't have state income tax. So be aware of that.
For me, but like at the start, it was mostly like research fit, like location, stuff like that. But when it got down to the last 2-3 schools, it's kind of hard to make a decision. And I literally decided because I asked Stanford, can you give me some money to come over there? And they said yes. And I was just like, okay, I'll come.
Yeah, so a lot of schools, I know of schools that provide transitional stipends. So that's something to look into when you're looking at the graduate programs that you're interested in. Do those schools provide those additional funds for moving and traveling? Are they available to all? Do you need to separately apply? Do you need to send emails out? So those are things to think about. Any other factors that may have played into you choosing your graduate school in terms of finances?
My story on that front, which is very ironic because I ended up making this my career, but I did not consider finances one iota when I went to graduate school. In retrospect, that was not wise of me to not pay attention to that. I got very lucky going to Duke. Duke paid a totally decent stipend, and Durham is a very median cost of living city. That was my saving grace because all the places that were offering me stipends and they weren't all that different. And so I ended up at a place where the cost of living was not high. So I was lucky in that respect. I think it's very important to consider cost of living when you're looking at different schools, like Zach was talking about, taxes are part of that. Absolutely. A resource that I like is called the Living Wage Database from MIT. And that will tell you you can look it up by like county or metro area. It'll give you kind of a broad overview of how much it costs just to pay for basic expenses for like a typical low spending person, low income person in that area. So compare that number that you see for that county or whatever to the stipend that you're being offered. Ideally, the stipend will be higher, although it is not always. Ideally, it would be much higher. So in my case, my stipend at Duke was like maybe about 30% higher than the local living wage. And I know that definitely was not the case had I gone to, somewhere in Boston or, California, a more expensive city. So I was lucky and it was not at all intentional.
I have a similar experience as Emily in that the extent of me considering finances was would I get paid? And but luckily coming here, my program, they were very upfront in saying, we will pay for you at all times during your program. So you never have to worry about funding. They were intentional in saying that you can live off of your stipend. They were intentional about putting it out there that some students buy their homes while on a stipend and things like that. And so I guess in a way, like I was very lucky because not only did they put all these things in front of me, but then also like the program itself was just built to be very financially supportive.
I can add something quick. So like in Palo Alto, the cost of living is like insanely high. So the stipend here is way higher, but when I compared it to the other schools and what they were offering with the cost of living calculator, it was basically the same. So I think that's very important to kind of like use a cost of living calculator or something like that and compare the stipends based on cost of living, because if I just chose based on like the actual number, Stanford would have been a no-brainer, but that wasn't the case.
Thank you. And we just got a question in the chat that says, how often did you go back home? And did your budget influence the number of times that you were able to go back home? And I'm going to add on to that, maybe travel, maybe take a break, take a vacation. So does anyone want to answer that?
Yes. Oh.
What's a vacation? Letitia, go ahead.
So actually in the podcast conversation that I had with Emily, we talked about this, and one of, I think, food and travel were right below me paying for my housing. I travel twice a year. I take like 2 weeks off. 1 week I go home, and 1 week I take a trip out of the country. Of course, you know, now it's COVID and things like that, so I'm not going out of the country, but I am taking a trip to Las Vegas in September. But for me, traveling is very important. That's a non-negotiable for me. So I find the money, I make the money exist for me to go and travel and go home and visit family.
Yeah, so this is my first year, so I haven't gotten to travel much yet, but I do have a budget for it. So I've been to Austin, Texas already, and I have some things planned. So I plan to go some other places as well, like Tokyo and other things. And I just kind of like put it into my budget. So I have like I have multiple savings accounts, one for like my emergency savings and one for like other things. So I like in my other savings account, I save for I'm also saving for a tattoo. So I just save for like random things in my other savings account. So that's how I kind of deal with like traveling and other expenses like that. And I plan to go home in September. So I definitely put that in my budget to be able to do that.
Thank you.
I have a word of warning for those of you who are currently in your early 20s. I found when I got to my mid 20s that suddenly I had a lot of obligation travel offered to me in the form of attending weddings and attending reunions. And of course, I wanted to see my family and so forth. And so it wasn't just going home to where my parents live and seeing them. I also got married during graduate school, so I had the other family to deal with, visiting them. So there was just a lot of travel that was sort of determined by other people. And of course, we wanted to do it and we did it, but it wasn't sort of vacations or like things that we planned on our own. There was just a lot of that. So if that's the kind of thing that you want to do, definitely need to save for it in advance, like using the system that I mentioned earlier, the one that George uses. Yes, it is probably forthcoming for you in the next several years.
Thank you. So now I think we should move on to maybe ways to supplement your income and supplement your stipend. So we've gotten that a few times. So what are some ways, whether it's internal to the university or some external ways that you can supplement your income? And maybe if you could provide some examples of what you've done or some things that you've seen other students do, that would be great.
I can quickly answer this. So I had a job with an office to help put on a program for undergrads that were coming over to kind of, well, it was over Zoom this year, but like we were kind of teaching them about how to apply to grad school and stuff like that. And that was a paid position. So I think that probably other schools have positions like that as well, where you can kind of get that on top of your stipend. And this might be a little bit more risky, but so I use credit cards, but I pay it off immediately. But I get credit cards that give me cash back. So I have a credit card that gives me 2% cash back on everything. I use it like a debit card. So I swipe and then pay it off as I'm like leaving the the store. And I also have 2 other credit cards that have like 5% cash back, but it depends on the situation. So like I have an Amazon credit card that 5% back on everything that I buy from Amazon. And I have a Discover credit card, like 5% cash back on like certain things from like certain months of the year. But like if you do that, don't like make sure you pay it off immediately. Don't kind of just like use all of your credit limit and then get in credit card debt, because it's kind of horrendous.
I could make some general comments about this. So as far as earning money on the side, working for money on the side, not like what George was talking about, that's not working, although it's a great strategy. You have to be very careful to check the contract, the terms of your fellowship that you're involved with your university. So some assistantship contracts will explicitly prohibit outside work, or they will say you can only work up to 10 hours per week. They might have some kind of limit on it. Fellowships as well sometimes allow you to have other sources of income, sometimes don't. So you just have to check what you're offered individually from your university. And also, if you are not a US citizen or permanent resident, if you're here on like an F1 visa, for example, it's very, very restrictive what you can do to earn money on the side. I will pop a podcast episode I did into the chat in a moment with a couple of people who are experts in this area on how to earn money on the side when you have an F1 visa. So just check. You don't want to lose your funding over this. You don't want to get your visa revoked over this. But there are ways, creative ways to earn money that will not be in violation of those terms if you are under that more restrictive scenario. But I will say that, let's say for people who are not under the super restrictive stuff with our contracts, it's very common to side hustle, but it's not common to have a job. Like it's not common to have a W-2 position where you have to show up somewhere at some specific time, but it's very common to be freelancing or tutoring or in the gig economy in some capacity. So yeah, very, very common.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add to that, I guess, is to Emily's point, if you can document all of your expenses, UT Austin students actually petitioned the graduate school, and we actually had stipends raised because the stipends were not keeping up with the cost of living. So a bunch of graduate students documented their apartment costs, their utility costs. They added it up and said, I'm in the red every single month, and this is what you're giving me. And to Emily's point, in the contract, it says we can't work anymore. So we have to find other kind of extramural opportunities outside the university, but you also want us to do high quality teaching and research. So where's the time of the day to do that? And you can petition in certain ways to have your stipend raised or to have your hours limit lifted. I had my hours limit lifted. I was supposed to do 20 hours of research a week. I could do 10 hours of admissions reading a week. That was about $18 an hour. And I only got that lifted because I could demonstrate that my stipend wasn't covering my cost of living.
Yeah, and I could also add to this. So as I said, I'm a third year PhD candidate at Brown. And so at Brown, there are a lot of offices, like George said, that will provide grad students opportunities to make a little money, maybe during the summer for a few weeks, either programming something for undergrads, programming events for grad students. And so that would be something that maybe when you're interviewing at your schools, or maybe if you want to reach out to grad students that you're able to find on directories for the schools that you're interested in, maybe just reach out and ask them maybe a list of questions, and that could be one of them. What are some extra ways that the school provides opportunities for income? And another thing is a lot of universities have teaching centers. And so if you work as like a teaching fellow or a writing fellow or some sort of fellow of a specific center that provides academic support, that's another way to sort of supplement your income. And so I've been a teaching fellow now for 2 years, and I'm able to make a bit more on each month's income, on each month's stipend. And that way I have a little bit extra money that I can, put to where I want. So yeah. So now, does anyone else want to add anything about supplementing income? So we've talked about how there are restrictions. Letitia?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that if you come in with any skill, this relates to what Emily was saying about in the gig world. So I teach yoga classes and I do some classes with the city. And I've also led like diversity, equity, and inclusion workshops with the university where they'll give me gift cards because they can't actually pay me as a student. So those are, and they're Visa gift cards, which you can essentially use anywhere that they accept a card. So yeah, getting little gigs, I think is probably, and participating in campus studies. On Penn State's campus, they do like test tastings for different foods, and they give me $5 every time I show up. So it's like $5 for 10 to 15 minutes. Or there are larger studies where maybe you have to read a passage and they'll give you like $30. So there's also those opportunities as well.
Thanks. So we had a few questions about fellowships, and I think this is the perfect opportunity to talk about them because a lot of students come in with uh, a preconceived notion that if you have multiple fellowships, that somehow that gives you a significantly larger stipend. So I was wondering if anyone can talk about that. We got a specific question in the chat saying, can I have two external funding sources? An example, if one is a NSF fellowship and maybe another one. So can anyone talk specifically about that, having multiple external funding sources, fellowships, and then relay that in the context of the stipend? And what does that actually mean in the context of the stipend that the student receives?
So I can quickly talk about that. So I have 3 fellowships. I have the NSF, I have the SGF, which is a Stanford one, and I have this ChemH fellowship. So my funding comes from the NSF and the ChemH combined. I mean, no, the NSF and the SGF combined. So if I had the SGF alone, it'd only be 3 years long. But since I had 2, it was for 5 years. It doesn't it doesn't stack. So there's like a top that you can get, and they basically kind of like bumped it up a little bit and made it last longer, which is 5 years instead of 3 years. And since I already had basically all the funding I could get, I don't get any money from the 3rd fellowship, so it's just kind of like on my CV. I think that answered the question. I don't know if there's anything else.
Yeah, kind of what George said. If you are wonderful and fortunate and qualified enough to win multiple fellowships, you should definitely go for them. It's a great idea to win fellowships, as George was saying, to put them on your CV. But yeah, oftentimes the university will just absorb what you win and pay you less. Not pay you less in your stipend, but it'll absorb money that you win and just use it towards your tuition or use it towards your fees, like the funding that they were already planning on giving you. That's not always the case. Sometimes winning multiple awards will increase your actual take-home pay, your stipend, but it's not this, it doesn't always work out that way. So it's not really that you can stack. And the university will generally have some kind of upper limit on what they're going to allow you to be paid. Yeah, I think I'll leave it there.
Thank you. So we have about 10 minutes left. So I think now we should start going into some of the questions about immediately dealing with your personal finances after this workshop and in preparation for grad school. So one student specifically asked, how did you overcome that intimidation of learning about personal finance? And for many students, this might be the first time they have to take out credit cards. This might be the first time they have to sign a lease agreement. So can you talk about some of the things that initially were rather intimidating, but that maybe you overcame through specific resources, and what did you do to become educated and knowledgeable about the decisions that you were making?
Yes, I can I can quickly answer this one. With what I did was take a personal finance class, as I mentioned earlier. So when I actually started taking the class, it was like another language. It was like I was like learning biology for the first time or whatever. But after like by the end of the class, I was kind of understanding it better, had it more comfortable with finance and stuff like that. But if you can't take a personal finance class, then I also did a lot of reading online. That's how I found Emily's like website. She has a lot of resources as well. And I feel like you can get the same kind of benefits of learning the language and becoming more comfortable the more you read about it.
I started my journey just reading books. I feel like for me, a book is a really great source because it gives you usually a pretty high level, like comprehensive picture of some subject area. It's not like watch a random video or read a random blog post and get like a tiny little slice. You can get someone's entire view of personal finance. So I was very intimidated about, for example, opening a credit card, all that kind of stuff and investing when I was first starting out. So the book that I read, it's probably a bit dated now, but it was titled like Personal Finance in Your 20s and 30s, Get a Life, Personal Finance in Your 20s and 30s by Beth Kobliner. Another great one would be Ramit Sethi's book. Someone can help me with the title. I Will Teach You to Be Rich. That's another good comprehensive one. Erin Lowry has several books. Broke Millennial. She has a series titled Broke Millennial. So I would say a book is a great place to start for a whole picture.
I definitely have a very non-traditional way to getting into finances. I mean, I don't know, maybe it's not non-traditional, but I just jumped into it, honestly. I went to a bank once, like my dad had always told me, oh, you should get a CD. And I was like, I have no idea what that is. And he was like, just go to the bank and they'll tell you. And so one day I got up the courage and I think I was in a whole nother state doing an internship in undergrad. And I just went to the bank and I was like, well, I would just like to open a CD with you all. And they were like, well, where are you located? And like they went through the different percentages of things. And it ended up coming out that, you know, opening a CD at that time wouldn't be good. But then they were like, but would you like a credit card? And I was like, well, sure, I'll take a credit card. Now, once again, I default back to what George said about, you know how to use a credit card because it can get you in lots of deep domino effect trouble if you don't. But I did get a credit card. And then like maybe another year or so later, I opened up a CD. I had saved a couple of $100. And I was like, well, I'll just put this in a CD and see what happens. I didn't know anything about compound interest or how money builds and grows. And so I just did it. And then coming into graduate school, something else my dad told me, open a Roth IRA. I have no idea what a Roth IRA is, what it means. I just know that I can contribute up to $6,000. So I was like, hey, okay, I'll just open a Roth IRA. Like a lot of it was just me jumping into it and picking up information here or there. Penn State actually has a resource center, a financial literacy resource center. And so I had gotten to a point to where like I wasn't comfortable going into investing, like actually into the market investing. And so she suggested to me, well, just open a high yield savings account for right now. And then next time you come, we'll talk about investing. Well, then the pandemic happened. And so then I was like, okay, well, we're not really going to go into investing. But then there are also other apps such as like Robinhood, and the other app names are leaving me right now. I'll type them in the chat when they come back to me. But my advice would be jump into it, but don't like throw all of your eggs in one basket.
It may also be a reason too, if you have a lot of financial anxiety, you don't have to go to grad school right away. I learned a lot about finances just through the childhood that I lived, but also just in my early mid 20s, just getting a paycheck and getting my first savings account, like things that I had to do to get direct deposit at my work. And I understood more about how benefits worked and how about retirement programs. And that was all through working a full-time job after my bachelor's degree. So that little bit of adulting and that gap I took, I didn't go to a PhD program until I was 30. So I had a while to learn a lot of financial institutions and what they did before I actually went to grad school. And that really saved me, I think, a ton of money. So to also consider, you don't have to go right away. You can learn a lot just in the working world.
Thank you. And so I think you all touched on investing. And so one question that we got, and we got a lot relating to investing, was how would you suggest a graduate student can become safely yet productively involved in investing for financial stability post-graduation? And are there specific investment firms, companies, apps that you have experience with and would suggest?
I could talk about this quickly. So I opened a Roth IRA with the Betterment, which is a robot IRA account, like a robo investor. And I kind of like that because I was able to start early investing because like the earlier you start, the more it kind of like grows without any like kind of experience or anything like that. So the robot kind of like takes your money and puts it in safe investments and allows it to grow over time. And to get experience in the stock market, I open a brokerage account and I invest in stocks, ETFs, and bonds and stuff like that. And then when I kind of get more experience and I kind of more comfortable with investing in the stock market, I'm going to switch my Roth IRA to a manual one to kind of save on fees. So that's how I'm doing it. I have quite a bit of money invested in the stock market in my Roth IRA at this point, and I'm getting more comfortable with the stock market, even though the stock market is kind of breaking my heart right now. But yeah, that's how I
agree, George. And one thing I did, I opened up a 403B, which is a tax sheltered retirement account that certain university employees can opt into. And after I budgeted my money, I knew I had about $180 that I wouldn't really miss. And I didn't, I had a separate rainy day account of just cash on hand for medical emergencies, that kind of stuff. And so I ended up just putting that $180 away every single paycheck. And I think when I was done, I had invested maybe $22,000, something like that, over 4 years. And that's money that I didn't really feel. I didn't really need that money to live. So if I didn't really need it, I was going to set it away and just forget about it.
Another vote for the Roth IRA, 403B if you can get it, but it's pretty rare. I had an investing goal of saving 10% of my growth, investing 10% of my gross income for retirement when I started grad school. And I actually increased that over the course of time to about 18% by the end. As I said, I was very aggressive about that. And I have always been with Vanguard. So I'm kind of a discount online brokerage firm fan. And I use a target date fund, which is a very generic and simple way to go about retirement investing.
Well, thank you all. We have 1 minute left, so I think that we should probably close up. And thank you all so much for being our panelists today. Thank you, Emily, for curating this panel. I think we answered a majority of the themes of the questions that came in. So thank you all so much. And if students want to contact you, what would be the best way? I'm not sure if maybe Samantha would be the best to answer this. Maybe would you all be comfortable with posting your maybe email or your handles for your Twitters? And I think that would be great. Well, thank you again so much, and thank you to all the attendees. This was a great conversation, and I hope you all really got a lot out of it.